Hi there. I thought I'd just do a wrap up from the video I made last week about this little futuristic space shuttle. I started off in the last video by retopologizing it from a basic sculpt, and then went on to UV unwrap it, and then I put a very basic black and white texture over it with some panel lines. I wanted to talk about the next steps I did in Substance Painter, and then how I exported that, and then put it into Sketchfab. So I thought I'd just go through that process, so it may be useful to somebody. The first step I took was to import it into Substance Painter. I took those basic texture paints that I did of the black and the white and the panel lines, and I divided it up into layers here. So you can just see this in action here if I disable the layers and then work upwards. So the first layer here was actually a just a basic black and white map of the textures imported here, so I can map the black texture onto that. And then I can overlay just a basic white texture as well, so that I can separate those out and start painting different textures on it. And then I brought in just some basic mask for the windows as well, so you can see that here. And then I also brought in those panel lines as well, so you can see that just being basically a height mask with the panel lines over here as well. So if I see that, you can just see that basic mask. So there is a little trick I did here that's worth sharing. So if I disable these top two layers, you can see that works. So you can see that the texture paint in Blender doesn't have sort of anti-aliasing really for that. So you can't get kind of the smoothest lines by painting the panel lines in Blender, but because I had the reference already in Blender, it was more accurate to paint those panel lines in Blender. But what you can do, if I go over to the actual material view so you can see this, is that I can smooth those out with a little trick by first of all blurring the lines here, which kind of does smooth it out, but it makes it a bit too blurry. But then what you can do is if you bring in a levels filter, you can kind of bring up the black part of the levels so that it sort of narrows the bandwidth of the blur, so that you get kind of that smoother feel. So you get kind of like you can zoom in a little bit more closely onto the model and maintain that detail. So that's just a bit of a trick I kind of use throughout. I use it for the masks as well. That was just worth highlighting. And then I just put a very kind of simple kind of booster motif at the back, just to give it the impression of kind of having some kind of futuristic propulsion. So that was the first stage of just getting it ready for texturing really in Substance. So the next stage was bringing in getting a decent kind of panel line texture. So this is where, just before this kind of stage, I would bring in some different shots of a space shuttle using Pinterest just as a board. So here you can see I've kind of tried to find pictures which had the texture. So if you kind of look really closely at some of these shots, you can see this kind of mottled panel texture that's kind of got little sort of checkered ridges in it. So I kind of wanted to kind of replicate that. It's less prominent on the kind of the back parts of the shuttle, but certainly at the front, it's got this sort of maybe more protection around the front that I wanted to kind of recreate. So I did there. Was I sort of tried to do a bit of a recreation of that kind of texture here in Substance Designer, so you can sort of see that in action. So I did that by combining some random tile sampler nodes and randomizing that and finding the edges of those, and then recombining those to create sort of a panel like pattern, and then overlaying those with little sort of square checkers for the kind of the bump part of that. So the bump map would be that. Then I added a bit of sort of subtle kind of warping into that texture, just to show that kind of sort of wear more. So that was kind of the basic texture that I brought in. So I overlaid that in my next version that you can kind of see here, where I've basically used Substance Painter's kind of warp projection to map on the different panels on there in kind of like a blended way, so that the panels kind of flow around the actual ship. So if I go into here and edit these vertices, you can see that I've used the projection warp of in Substance Painter to kind of do that flow. So I kind of created a series of sort of mini patches of that texture that kind of wrap around the vehicle to do that. So initially I kind of mapped the whole vehicle using this kind of patterned texture, and you can kind of hopefully see that. But because it was mostly at the front, I actually created another version with kind of variations of that texture that doesn't have the kind of it has most of the it has that paneled effect at the front, and then it sort of has kind of more traditional, flatter, smoother looking panels at the back. And then I added a little kind of sort of ambient occlusion effect, some darker textures around the paneling. I also used a more kind of stock shuttle panel texture, using the same method of kind of mapping on the different panels onto the black parts as well. So you can kind of see that if I move the HDRI around, and then kind of added a kind of wear at the back of the propulsion system there, and then also added a little bit of reflectivity to the different windows here, so you can kind of see that in action. And all these are just sort of separate patches of panels that I've mapped on using that same technique of making sure that they kind of they wrap around the flow of the object, to give that kind of more aesthetic look and feel. I then went full circle and brought it back into Blender. I exported the textures and I re-imported the FBX I had exported from Blender, just to make sure it all kind of hung together. So you can see that here. I couldn't resist adding a bit of kind of bloom effect in here, so I can kind of just show you that in the compositor. All it was just adding a glare effect, and in newer versions of Blender you can actually incorporate the compositor or elements of the compositor into the live viewport rendered view. So I can kind of so I could kind of get a kind of a feel for how I wanted the overall shuttles would kind of be presented. And that was about it really. I just wanted to kind of test that the textures looked okay in another program before I uploaded it all to Sketchfab. So here it is in all its glory on Sketchfab. So the background I was a bit cheeky with and generated in Midjourney. What I did is I kind of uploaded this image of the space shuttle and then gave some descriptive text around, putting it in a blue background with a C from orbit, because I wanted kind of a blue background to bring out the kind of the black. It wasn't kind of a black background that wouldn't bring out the shape of the shuttle very well. I then brought it into Photoshop and selected the actual shuttle that the Midjourney had generated, and then I deleted that and used content aware fill by just expanding the borders a little, so it knew that I wanted to fill it with just blue, and that just generated the background. And that's about it. That's kind of the general process that I follow when I'm just making these sort of little spaceships on the side. And I hope that you've found elements of the video useful. It's kind of one of the first I've done like this for a while, so let me know if you'd like me to make more of these sorts of videos in the future. Okay, bye bye then. Bye bye.